Member Cantwell for having this hearing on this very, very important issue. Our national security, protecting our families from terrible acts of terrorism, I can tell you, is on the minds of Montanans every day as I travel around the state. And it's telling to us today how important I believe energy independence, American energy independence and security is to our safety, to our prosperity, as well as the entire world's. So count me in, and I think many here in the dais, as those who believe we should remove the ban on U.S. oil exports and move forward here and continuing the U.S. in leadership in oil production. The irony to think that the president just moved forward with removing the ban on Iranian oil exports, and we are the only nation in the world that still has a ban on its exports, I think cannot be overstated, and I hope we will soon remove that ban. It's good for the American people. It's good for our economy. I think it's good for the world. As we look at what's going on right now with ISIS, and just the testimony we heard today that one of their leading sources of revenue certainly is from oil production, it seems like it's pretty clear there's two parts of our strategy. One would be to increase U.S. oil production, which hopefully we'll be working to address that through removing the oil export ban. The second is destroying ISIS oil production and revenues on that two-prong attack. In the last couple of months, we unfortunately have seen the second largest terror attack in Europe since 9/11. We've seen the largest, most lethal terror attack on our soil since 9/11. And interestingly enough, it seems like suddenly the tempo on attacks on the oil assets of ISIS have increased. My question for Mr. Harrell, and I've heard that maybe the administration says the intelligence has changed and so forth. I'm not convinced. Mr. Harrell, you said one of the most effective ways of fighting ISIS is to launch attacks on its oil infrastructure. However, CIA Director Morell said in Charlie Rose here a couple weeks ago that one of the reasons the U.S. was not doing this was because of environmental concerns coming from the administration. Do you think that made sense?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Clearly, the administration has had a number of concerns over the last year as it has thought about the operational tempo of attacks, including the need to gather intelligence and the need to gather knowledge about what collateral costs might be, whether to civilians or future Syrian production. Certainly, in my view, right now, given the threat we are facing from ISIS, the attacks we and our allies have faced over the last month, while it is important to consider collateral costs, the near-term benefit of taking out revenues needs to weigh very heavily on that scale. And so I do think it's important that we assess and maintain, well, although assessing the costs, we maintain a very robust operational tempo and focus on taking out the oil infrastructure, obviously while minimizing to the extent we can those kinds of collateral costs.
And I mean, wouldn't it make sense? I mean, there's been the words used by the administration as trying to contain ISIS. I think many of us believe it's about destroying ISIS. And back to your testimony saying that their leading sources of revenues is from oil. If we cut off their revenues, that would be a very, very important part of destroying their capabilities to launch their terror attacks around the world.
I very much agree with that. I think it is clear that ISIS is not a threat we should contain. ISIS is a threat we need to destroy. Very much agree with you, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Webster, do you have any thoughts on that as well? We've heard these comments that perhaps the limited attacks in Iraq and Syria have been related to environmental concerns of the administration. Now suddenly with these two large attacks, one in Paris, one in San Bernardino, suddenly the strategy changed. Any insights there?
Senator, it's a little outside of my expertise in that I'm just a global oil markets guy, but I would agree with Peter that it does seem when you're looking at this in terms of the cost, as it were, in terms of collateral damage against what ISIS brings, particularly as I am looking at around the world and looking at increased risks to the global supply system over the next several years. And so anything that can be done that can actually roll that back and put that into a better posture, I think would be a positive thing for the oil market.
Yeah, this gets back to, we don't want politicians running this war. We want the U.S. military. If the objective is to destroy ISIS, let's destroy ISIS. Mr. Webster, a question for you is, how do you think removing the ban on crude oil exports will help reduce the world's risk to terrorism?
So by removing the export ban on the U.S., what it does is it allows the U.S. Producers to ensure that they don't get such a big discount compared to global prices. So that maximizes their price, or as I would call it, essentially removes what has in the past been what I had termed a policy discount. Now, at this particular time, because of high refining runs in the United States and because of the low price and because we have lower production, you probably actually wouldn't see a whole lot of barrels leave the country if you actually allowed crude oil exports today. However, it's important still to change this policy, because by changing this policy, it actually supports U.S. production growth in the future, rather than doing it when it suddenly becomes an emergency sort of nature. So it's an important policy for us because it allows us to increase U.S. production. And by increasing U.S. production, as we all know, U.S. production is what I would argue is a much safer place for production to come from rather than other countries. And so that increases overall energy security, not just in the United States, but actually on a global basis. And it must be remembered that oil markets is a global market.
Thank you.